My name's Guy Kestevan. I've been a professional bike and kit tester for nearly 25 years, and today the bike I'm giving a tech talk around on is Merida's eSilex Plus 600. So eSilex is Merida's gravel bike range. As you can see, this is coming on 650 by 47mm tyres, but plenty of room in there under the fork and in the back end of the bike for bigger if you want. And you could run it with 29s, but obviously because this has got a motor in the rear and a battery in the frame, they've gone for a slightly larger volume tyre to just give a bit more cushioning, which I think is a totally sensible choice. So let's have a look. I mean, obviously it's an e-bike, so let's have a look at the e-bike componentry on here first. This is the X35 motor from Mahle. Sorry, the X35 Plus motor from Mahle. Not massively different to the original X35. It's a 40 watt Newton meter motor, and the major difference is they've kind of beefed up the flanges on the hub so you can run higher spoke tension, because there was an issue with early Mahle wheels with them coming up out of tension and the wheel being a bit weak, so that you can properly crank it up. You can see it's a twin spoke setup to handle that extra stress on there. And then in here, coming around the far side, you can see all the wiring just runs underneath the motor there, and then inside the seat stay, and then up inside the frame. So relatively neat installation, and you can see, you know, really slim down tube. I mean, it's only a 250 watt hour battery in there, so relatively small and light, but you can get a range extender, which is essentially a bottle cage fitting battery cell, plugs in there, and then you just plug it into the charging port under that rubber bung there. I won't do that because it'll disturb the bike, but yeah, that's where it plugs in, and that's where you recharge it as well. And as you can see, it's an aluminium frame. It's mostly smooth welded up the front. You can see it has a bit of a bead still, but you know, most of the welding smoothed off on it, so nice clean lines, relatively slim stays as well. And if you watch the live ride review, I've been really surprised by how smooth this bike is, considering it's got, you know, over a couple of kilos of hub sat in the back, which I thought would be a bit of a paperweight battering around on the back end. With these Terra Trail 47mm tyres in there, even with tubes in, because it's not set up tubeless, and this, you know, a fairly chunky chainstay on there, I've been really impressed by how smooth this bike has felt. And then, you know, there's little touches like the skinny little connection there on the junction, the fact the seat tube leans back slightly, and you've got a good extension on this carbon seat post as well, and a relatively well padded saddle. That all helps towards the comfort rating of this bike. But really, it's this triple butted alloy frame that really makes a difference to the ride quality of the bike, and the fact that you've got a full carbon fork up front, which, as you can see, really nips down to very narrow neck there, and then actually tips back a little bit at the tips. So again, just a bit more of a roll around, what they call a wrist on this fork, just to make the whole fork a lot smoother, even though it's actually a 1.5 steerer at the top end for stiffness in terms of steering. It's still a really smooth fork. And I've ridden standard eSilexes as well, not just this e-bike eSilex, and been really impressed with the comfort levels of all this range of bikes. So impressive work by Merida then, and you know, do watch the live rider video to get a full idea of that. Anyway, I'm waffling on. What else do you need to know? Talking about the fork, as you can see, it's got Merida's own specific stem, and that includes very neat internal cable routing under there, so it all slides under the stem and then inside the frame. So again, a very clean looking frame. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 bottle cage bosses, and then another accessory mount there. It'll take a rack, it'll take mud guards, and it'll even take a flat mount kickstand under there if you reconfigure the rear cable slightly. So lots going on in terms of utility features on it, and you've got more mounts there on the fork. It's not a full triple bolt everything cage mount, but you could probably squeeze one on there just on those 2 bolts, or just run extra bottles on there. Background here, you've got GRX 600 rear mech and GRX 600 crank, because it's a hub motor, you can use a standard crank, which means a standard bottom bracket as well, and a standard Q factor, so it's no wider than a normal crank, so everything just feels perfectly normal when you're pedaling it. And because it's a GRX rear mech, it means you've got a clutch there to keep everything from rattling and banging about at the same time. 11 speed, good gear range on there. It's an 1142. So with that little bit of power assistance, you know, no problem getting this bike up climbs. And at just over 13 kilos for the complete bike without pedals, it's not a bad weight either. And then you've got the ability to add that extra battery pack on if you do want. Another nice feature, you've got a replaceable seat colour there with replaceable bolt in it, so you know, if you do happen to get ham-fisted and strip the post out, then it's not a problem replacing the clamp or the bolt receiver. And it's actually a carbon seat post as well, so that really helps with the comfort levels. The one thing I would probably change on this bike, although I like the shape of them, I like the flare, I like the kind of this slight curve back. It's not massive, but it's quite a nice little random curve to sort of bring your wrist angle back in. I definitely want more bar width, because in terms of the head angle, 70.5 and a 75 degree seat angle, it's actually relatively progressive, and that long back end helps with stability as well. But only having, I mean, I think they're listed as a 42, but actually across the hoods I've measured it as a 41 centimetre handlebar. That definitely restricts the kind of leverage and control you've got compared to a 44 or even wider. So yeah, I mean, but you know, changing an alloy bar isn't exactly a deal breaker. And you've got, you know, big, chunky, nice, intuitive GRX shifting there. It's just like a standard Shimano gear setup. So one lever up, one lever down, and then you've just got standard brake lever on the far side. It's not enablable for a dropper post at the moment, though in theory I think you could squeeze an extra cable in there to run an internal dropper on there. And in terms of motor management on the bike, it's just all done through this single button on the top tube. And one feature, luckily you can turn this off if this would annoy you, but
speed 0, battery 95, altitude 217.
It does actually give you verbal feedback on your ride if you want it, as well as changing the mode if you put a longer press on it. And as you can see, it's got a ride app with your altitude, your power, your battery life, your RPM, your average speed, your distance, your time over the last kilometre, how much range you got left, speed, stopwatch, and there's loads of different functions you can configure on the app. And also that lets you work through your settings as well. So you can add heart rate monitors there as well, because you can actually slave your Mahle to the heart rate, your Mahle motor to the heart rate monitor. So if your heart goes above a specific heart rate, that's when it kicks in. Otherwise, it's just doing it off wheel speed and hub speed. It's not torque sensitive, and I'll talk a bit about how that affects the ride in the ride review. So yeah, like I say, as usual, make sure you watch that. But you've got all sorts of different settings. You've got navigation, you've got saved destinations, you've got mapping, last position. You can download maps, change the settings in here. You know, all sorts of control, as you'd hope, just through a nice simple smartphone app. But I have to say, it's pretty easy to use, is that one, once you've set up your account. So what it lacks in terms of sort of on-bike control, it definitely makes up for through that app. And it, you know, it downloads to all the usual ride recording apps if you want it to. Sort of the overall, having ridden this and having looked through the detailing on it, the overall vibe of this bike is just a very, very subtle e-bike. It's very quiet. The power certainly isn't massively intrusive. It's just a gentle sort of helping tailwind. But it barely looks like an e-bike either. And, you know, having the motor on there certainly doesn't get in the way of all the functionality of the frame. You know, you've got even more bottle cages and fixtures than you would on a normal bike. And, really impressively, it doesn't interfere with the ride quality either. So that's the static talk round done on the bike. Make sure you watch the live ride review to get a really good idea of how the bike actually rides, because obviously that's the important thing. Thanks to Merida UK for sending the bike in for test. Thanks to Giro Cycling UK for sponsoring the channel. Thanks to PTs, Crud and DMR as well. Massive thanks to my Patreon subscribers who pledge a small amount on Patreon every month to get extended, exclusive, behind the scenes and ad-free edits as a thank you. And they also kind of get a higher level of feedback from me answering technical questions. So if you really like what I'm doing with the channel, please consider subscribing on Patreon and giving me some support every month. But otherwise, make sure you subscribe, click for notifications so you know when the next video is coming up. Give this video a thumbs up, tell your mates about it, But for now, I've been Guy Kestevan on Guy Kest TV on Merida's eSilex Plus 600. Thank you very much.